Thanks everybody for coming to this panel. This is a very weird panel because, things like politics and activism are weird words, especially in a world where you start seeing like white supremacists call themselves activists, because it's true, they are activists, but for white supremacy. So the word activist on its own doesn't mean a whole lot. People also throw like politics out there as like, identity politics, and they talk about just talking about who you are like it's a negative thing. And that's always kind of strange because it's like, we live in a world with lots of different people. That's a great thing. So the thing about this talk is that it's a little different than, like, I wanted to do something that was I wanted to dive into this topic, but it's going to be a little different because basically I looked at each panelist's talk that they had submitted that are wildly different, but they all had a bit of a bent of activism or was steeped in politics. And something that we love doing at the GDoCExpo is getting disparate individuals together to talk about and what is important to them and how it relates to game on a whole. And also one of the focuses of this talk is game design, because these are all people who work in design. So these are our speakers, and I just wanted to go through a quick intro. These are the talks as they were submitted. So Tim Flusk, his talk was Lesbians in Apartheid, Marginalized Stories Through Mechanics. I believe that the way many video games are developed and designed excludes telling stories outside the hegemony and the status quo, mostly an extension of Western imperialism. The West often dominates our culture. I will talk about how to utilize progressive design principles, focused on interrogating why we make players perform certain actions in games. This extends to how we can use this to create their experience within the games and educates players to empathy. D has diasporic identities and third culture individuals in games. Identities as related to immigration, the effects of immigration and globalization as a whole are unique, yet imperative to understand, especially in the context of American culture. Though different, diasporic identities, referring to, in this case, trends of families who migrate from their home country to a different one, usually looking for work, losing a sense of their original culture, and third culture individuals, referring to, in this case, individuals whose parents have different culture than the culture they are surrounded with, such as someone with Filipino parents growing up in the United States, bring a unique and less understood perspective, as well as a set of challenges to their work. So these are just like really quick, these aren't the whole things, just going through. Kirtik is building games in America as an immigrant. His talk was, I have been working on indie games and gaming related projects for nearly 10 years with US-based teams. I started a game-inspired fitness company and partnered with a college classmate to churn out indie games on the side. With an Indian passport, recent developments, immigration, and low income from my bootstrapped entrepreneurial career, I had to leave the US. I only became a permanent resident in March 2018. And then Aaliyah was, AAA is for activism. I would like to speak about reimagining AAA, where the A's stand for agency for marginalized bodies, accountability for everyone, holding others accountable, calling out in, but also being aware of the power privilege we have and how we wield our platforms at every level. And 3, accessibility, work that is built on the backs of the community should work for that community. Want to make a VR piece about black poverty in America? What good is it if it's trapped in an $800 headset tethered to a $2,500 computer? So yeah, these were very different talks, but I think they have a thread that's just going through all of them. So I want to just go talk to each panelist, and we'll be opening this up so that, because I feel like everything that they have to deal with, someone else will have something to say about as well. So I guess for Tim, based on the idea of progressive design principles and how they can contrast with the status quo. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. Just working? Cool. What I mean by that is just sort of in my attempts to understand mechanics and design better through my studies, it became more and more obvious that certain mechanical sets almost weren't being used correctly. It felt like they were just being parroted between designers and games because they were popular and they could make money, I guess. And so sort of doing research through this, sort of implementing different games in different ways, the kind of things I saw was that specifically with stealth games, a lot of them are like turn you into this Batman sort of thing, or ninja, I guess, sometimes, where it's about killing these enemies or getting these items really quickly and effectively. But how that's implemented is kind of contrary to that, because we're trying to sort of simulate ninjas and assassins, but that doesn't really make sense for that, because just from the histories of what we know that thieves do, thieves are very opportunistic and very quick, as opposed to going through an entire level, and the assassins will shoot you from across the way, basically. We know how, just from assassinations that we know throughout history. And so I was interrogating what that mechanical set that we had been using for stealth was doing. And it became more and more obvious that it was about navigating these spaces really inefficiently. And I was trying to figure out what that actually meant. Like, when do you have to navigate spaces inefficiently? And it just sort of emerged from looking at it directly, that it reminded me a lot of just the experiences that I've had, and many of my colleagues and friends and family members have had, of when you are navigating a space in a society that doesn't want you there. You have to context switch, speak with your white voice, as some people might say. Queer people have to sometimes force themselves to be straight passing, whatever that means, and all those kind of things. And women have suffered for a very long time. But basically, going to the office or walking down the street, it becomes really obvious that to make sure that you don't put yourself in a situation where the systemic oppression sort of reveals itself to you to try and kick you out of the society and exclude you. What we do as marginalized members of society, we try to make ourselves less intimidating as black people. We try to not be uppity as women, and we try to not be flamboyant or be ourselves as queer people, as they keep on claiming that we are, just so we don't get murdered, or we can get paid, or we can literally buy food for ourselves. Yeah, like one of the things I did with a group of friends of mine was simulate like a hypothetical situation for one of our friends, which was she's a black lesbian and very politically active back home in South Africa, and so what she constantly has to deal with is sort of like aggressors from sort of like the demographics that like represent the oppression. So she has to deal with white people because she's a black person fighting for black freedom in my country, and she's a woman, so she's fighting for women's rights, and she's queer, so she's fighting for queer rights. And so just walking down the street with her opinions and her ideas and her representation, she experiences these aggressors of people trying to disagree with her for her existence, disagree that her existence is a thing, convert her, the whole shebang. And that made more sense to me as a game to represent stealth than infiltrating some bank or something, because that's what the mechanics actually tell, as opposed to the power fantasy that they're trying to represent.
That was a lot. No, it's great. It's answering. It's like, I feel like like that was a lot in like the best possible way. But it's like I'm at like that part where like choose who to talk to next, because there's like there's like a bunch of paths, which is why I like these panels. So I'm gonna continue going through, and I feel like a lot of that actually speaks to Dee's part about talking about like what a third culture individual is, and the diaspora, and like talking about like having to maybe be, I guess, more performative because you're not in a place that wants you there, but you want to be there for whatever. So could you actually just maybe expand a little bit on those concepts and wrap that back in like how that works with the kind of principle of like altering how games are designed?
Yeah. So really quickly, I'm Dee, they, them, and yeah, I just want to set some of that vocabulary and language, because I think that these terms are very common and easily understood by the people here, but I like this vocabulary of saying a third culture individual, meaning a person who lives in a cultural context that is different than the cultural context that their parents were raised in. I'll speak for myself, so I call myself Filipino American. I grew up in the States, and more importantly, my parents are Filipino immigrants. So I call myself a third culture individual because my parents raised me as Filipino, kind of, but I was in the States and I had to be American, but I'm not really American. The important phrase is to go, oh, I know that I am never going to be fully accepted as Filipino or as American, therefore I say I'm a third culture individual. So I think that there are a lot of ways to explore why that happened. Why did my parents have to go and find economic success in a different country than the Philippines? But I think what's more important is it gives us vocabulary to talk about Tim's idea, which is, what does it mean to be straight passing? What does it mean as, being in a place that you're never accepted, no matter what your reality is, and how you shift those identities to navigate that space, literally, or for survival.
Could I jump in?
How'd that sound?
Huh?
Could I jump in on
Yeah,
that?
absolutely.
Because I wanted to, Dee and I were talking earlier about like how I relate to this terminology just as a Black American, and like perpetually being trapped in that space because I don't have that like opportunity to come to America for a better opportunity. I was brought here, and all of the culture and identity that I and my community create gets like co-opted. So always being in that space and like, how do you get out of that? Maybe I can go somewhere else. I don't know. But bringing that back around to what Tim was saying, and how mechanics are being used, I kind of want to relate that to my experience at UCLA. So I went to UCLA. I was a resident of the UCLA Game Lab for many, many years, and that's where I made my games in like this art context. And so I feel like I came in also first generation transfer student, so I came in kind of naive, and I didn't like know how to make games the right way. And the implication was like the right way to make games, at least anytime I tried to collaborate with anyone, was like you start with these mechanics and you make these rule systems, and like then you put some skin on top or whatever. But I always started from this place of like the experience. Like, what is that emotional experience I want the player to have? I don't care. The rule system is all about like it's not about like recreating this like physical experience necessarily. I was always trying to put people in my head space so that they understood, what are the limiting factors in my life? What is the obstacle course I have to navigate based on my identity in this world? So again, when you talk about like stealth, like absolutely, I'm with you. Like just being a woman navigating the world. I did a VR piece a couple years ago that was called In Passing. And this was just a space, like a very minimal prompt asking people to narrate their experience in public space. And it was just bananas. One of the things that revealed itself to me, because I interviewed a bunch of different people, not just women, even though I thought that would be the most kind of compelling experience, but I was really shocked to find that even people that I thought had a lot of privilege, like straight white men, were actually very aware of like the public space they were in and how they had to play that up, or people who like were white passing and said, oh, I actually have immigrant parents, but it's not obvious. So when I'm in a bar or when I'm on the street, I don't bring that up because people who are bigots, basically, who feel comfortable saying certain things around me, I don't want to make myself a target. It was just very interesting to think about how universal that is, and yet we see this playing out of the same, to me, very boring, tired fantasies when we could really share a much more compelling experience.
One thought on that. Yeah, for a bunch of like nerd game designers who are like really into designing for spaces and performance and like interaction, like the lived experience of being a person of color in a new place is all about navigation and like emotional attachment and anxiety. So I don't know, yes, agree with all of this.
Yeah.
That brings that perfectly to Kirtik. I wanted to ask you, because you wanted to talk about your experience as an immigrant in U.S., and you have found, I guess, that working with people in the U.S. was like a favorable thing, as opposed to maybe working locally in like Oman?
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
so I'm Kirtik. So for some background, I grew up in this quiet country in the Middle East called Oman. It doesn't figure in the news, which is a good thing for the Middle East, as it stands. And so I came here when I was 18. I did school in Boston and went to engineering school because my parents are Indian. And because I fell in love with games when I was like literally on my dad's lap, and we had a 486 at home, and I was like, games are awesome. It's so magical. Like, I feel like I can do anything when in this context. And growing up, like the only kind of perspective I could have on games was, oh yeah, I'll write C++ code for some big company. That's how I'll make games. Coming to America, I was able to basically see all these like other perspectives, other ways I could kind of take my career forward in this industry that I was really excited about. So it wasn't just writing code. I was like, oh wow, it's art, it's storytelling, it's emotions, it's like building communities, right? It's like all these people who are excited about the same thing. So there's so much more to games that obviously I was experiencing playing games, but I wasn't thinking about from a creating perspective until I came to America. And that is something that is undersold. Like, it's, most of the time when I talk to anybody about my experience being in America, it's, let's say, not usually positive. But that's why I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of say, like, there's a reason why I went through all of these things to come and be here in America, and it's like a 10-year immigration process, and including having to leave the country and wandering around in Asia homeless essentially while working out of my laptop. That's basically kind of what I wanted to talk about. And also listening to Dee mention how her parents as immigrants came here, and then they're unsure how best to raise their daughter, right? It's like, do we raise them with our Filipino values? Do we try to understand the American values? And that might be me if I'm trying to raise kids in a few years or something, right? So I don't know where I would be standing, and what would my hypothetical child think of the way that I raised them? And going back to your original question, which after all of that, there are a couple of aspects to the American mindset of creating things that is hard to find in many other parts of the world, especially when you don't look like the expected person in that place, right? If you wanted to work in the Japanese game industry, it's incredibly difficult if you're not Japanese for various, kind of extents of being Japanese. And that is one thing that I felt because I'm of Indian heritage, and even if there was a game industry in Oman, which as of yet there isn't quite yet, but it is slowly starting to kind of make its way from Saudi Arabia and Turkey. not actually being Omani, appearing or speaking Arabic or having a family history in Oman, it would be very difficult to kind of navigate a lot of the career workspaces. Whereas in America, it's it is a nation of immigrants. As much as there is a hierarchy, it is still accepted for people to come from many different backgrounds into the industry.
So Kirthik, are you saying as many problems as I experience here, this is as good as it gets? I don't have anywhere to go?
Yeah, I also want to dogpile on this. Just kidding.
This is like a choose your own adventure, like it just keeps going, but
Yeah.
any answer is right.
I want to say the obvious and a random thought I had, which is, as we all know, it's hard to be a person of color in a place that's majority white people.
Got some news for you.
Oh boy! And it has unique difficulties being a game developer, which one thought I just want to pitch out there, this panel is called Activism in Game Design. One thought that I have is yes, how can we bring activism into our game design, but also there is so much work to be done in games, 100%.
Absolutely. Well, that also loops to Aaliyah. You're making a game that deals with colorism and beauty standards in the world and in America, and how has the response been? Because you've talked a little bit about how people will come up to you and talk about systemic issues and there's no way to fix them.
So I'm going to answer this in two parts because this does speak to both game design and also games and the community around games and even the perception of serious games or social impact games. So I describe myself on Twitter at least as a social justice warrior. And I normally am very upfront about that, but I found, particularly because I'm in the phase of trying to actually launch Objective, that's the name of the game, as a commercial product, that I'm getting boxed in. I've had a lot of conversations in the past month that are essentially, this is my paraphrasing, but are you sure you really want to pay your rent? You could just give this away for free, and you could be more impactful if you're doing X, Y, and Z, which is still for me goes back to not being able to feed myself and my family. And so that's one issue, and I want to talk about that because when you introduced my game as deals with colorism, that's true. But my new pitch is this is an attractive game for attractive people by attractive people. Social justice, I don't know her. That's but
So are you trying to pass in a world where I'm just saying, no, it's interesting because it's you're saying by saying I'm tackling something, people are whoa, and then you're you'll feel good about yourself playing this game that's actually making you feel bad about yourself. And then they're oh, okay, that sounds good.
So but that's the weird thing. So I've been playtesting Objective for 6 years, and the fact that I was always very upfront about oh, look, there's this diverse set of people. The original version of Objective was centered around black women, and every card, I guess I have to tell you about the game. So every card of the game is an illustrated portrait of a person, right? And the game features these doppelgangers, so it's the same facial template, but it's just different coloring, so going to that colorism. And the game was always about it's like a social party game, so there's a judge, and then other people are saying oh, I'm gonna submit this card, and the judge has to tell you, has to actually vocalize their thought process of why they're choosing one card over another. And so if you imagine a round where two people who come out who are the same, but one's got light skin and the other one's got dark skin, that becomes a problem. And so that was always very highlighted in the game. And for players, most people still played the game and got what I wanted them to get out of it. But what I found is when it came to mentorship or it came to opportunities or conferences, not this one, but right, getting a job, for instance, me talking in that way, I often felt limited and tokenized, right? Because it's oh, this is the game, this is going to watch the Slave movie. I'm gonna go do it because I feel I'm supposed to, but I'm only ever gonna watch it once, and then I'm gonna pat myself on the back for going to do that. And of course I'm speaking in these terms of what a majority or more privileged group would read. It's different for us, right, when we do this stuff. So I am in this space where I'm not trying to pass, but I believe in everyday feminism. I believe in everyday social impact. Like, I remember when Beyonce dropped Lemonade. Yeah, this is a Beyonce conversation now. And like there was this discourse, because like Bell Hooks is like, you know, Beyonce's not a real feminist. It's like this watered down version, da 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 da. And I'm just like, I love Bell Hooks, like I really do. But sometimes you are responsible for advancing a movement, and like that movement gets advanced, and like that feminism looks a little bit different. So I know that Beyonce is a capitalist. That's a problem. Like, I know Beyonce, like, you know, plays to all of these like very mainstream beauty standards. But I also know that Beyonce sells, and that's true, she's selling it, sells a brand of feminism that reaches people who don't have access to the discourse, who reaches people who didn't have the opportunity to spend thousands of dollars to go to college, like who reaches people who, you know, are in the lives that they have, and they may not be in a position to like say, okay, boy, bye, but they feel empowered and they can like employ those lessons in their everyday lives. And I think it's incredibly important as we do this work that we don't just continue to talk to people who already know, that we're able to open this up and create entry points for everybody who needs it. And so with Objective, like, I'm never trying to pass. The game is still doing what it's supposed to do, but it's doing it in such a way that you're playing the game, and then you know you've been bamboozled. Like, that's my goal.
That's probably a very good design tip, just in general. Like, I remember Mary Flanagan with Buffalo. They talked about how if you want to make something that changes people's minds, you kind of have to you got to bring them in. Like, it's kind of like, and you've seen this with like movies like Get Out also, where people are just like, where even like Jordan Peele will say, oh yeah, like white people come in and they're like, well, all the white people can't clearly be evil, and then you find out all the white people are evil. But then they're like, oh man, I really like this dude Chris, like why are they being so bad to him? And then they stay, and then they come back and see the movie again, and they're like, really, are we that bad? It's like, and Jordan will be like, yeah, so, but it's like that idea, right? Like if they would have made the movie like, your white people are bad, then and they'll steal your brain and like do anything. They just want to own your body. That would have been, nobody would have come, right? Like people, and so that leads to just like the idea of getting people in and then hitting them with the message after.
Yeah, and actually, very interesting experience of mine related to that is that I actually first watched Get Out when it premiered in Korea, because this was when I was kind of wandering around. And it was the strangest experience, because there was only me and I could tell one other person in the theater who had lived in America. And a lot of the subtler aspects that were, you know, when you finish watching the movie, you think back and you're like, oh, that makes so much sense, kind of stuff that was in Get Out, like when the gardener speaks to Chris for the first time, and you know, when you're first watching it, you have this cognitive dissonance. You're like, what's something so off about this? When the movie's over, you get it. A lot of the audience did not get it, because they don't understand the American context. And this is why, when, you know, coming back to kind of game design, activism, kind of building these things, in America you can have these conversations. It's actually very difficult to have a lot of these conversations in other parts of the world, just because it's kind of, yeah, it's just not normal in society to be kind of bringing these things out to the forefront. And the person that I was with, the girl my Korean friend, I would be laughing at certain scenes, and it was just me and this one other person in the theater, like 5 rows away from me, laughing. And everyone else was like getting freaked out because there's like this creepy music in the background, and it's like a high tension situation. But it's funny because we understand like what's weird about that. And yeah, I had to like rewatch the movie 3 times with her and like explain, like, now you see from the ending like what they're referencing here. And she was like, oh wow. And it was like constant, like, yeah, mind explosions for her, like each time we were rewatching the movie. So that kind of does tie back to with the game design as well. It's like we can make games like Objective, and it would kind of have that impact here in America. And then we need to think about, again, if you want to move that to a global audience, because these conversations are important on a global scale. And, you know, there would be other places like in South Africa or like in England, in UK would probably still make sense, but there's so many other parts of the world where they do need to also understand these things.
Well, I just wanted to, not to cut you off, Dee, because I want to hear what you have to say. I just wanted to, like, colorism is a problem globally. Like, and I mean, coming from like the Philippines diaspora, like there's black people and there's African like slaves that were brought to the Philippines. Like it makes it very different than the rest of like Asia, because it's like, this is like mini like European country being like, yeah, we're going to drag people there too. So then it comes, because I remember I was younger and I was like, why do so many Filipino people have like Spanish last names? Because you don't learn these things, that it's like, well, Spain did all this, and they did that, and they brought these people there, and then why did everybody look so different? It's like, yeah, but then you see that even in like countries, there's people like bleaching their skin, and also like, I guess Yusuf gave a talk earlier where he was talking about like colorism and how like cameras are done, like, and all these things, and it becomes this issue where like even just making your characters or making your game, like what do you make them look like or whatever. But I don't actually want to ask that. I just wanted to interject, and I wanted to hear what you had to say.
Yeah, I'll jump in with two thoughts now. Directly look into the audience. All right, I'm Asian American, so I'm gonna do that thing where I address other Asian Americans. Asian Americans, I love y'all. Y'all need to stop your anti-blackness shit, and you need to confront your families, you need to confront your friends, and you confront the systems around you, because y'all need, I'm not a fan, Yeah, the Philippines history is wild and just wet and weird, so go into that Wikipedia hole if you're ever interested for some pain. The thought I wanted to bring, prepping for this, Sean asked me, he acknowledged my interest in talking about these third culture individual topics, and asked me to think about who would I want to engage with these ideas? Why do I think it matters? Like, who in games do I think this would matter to? And for me, I could say cop-out answer of everyone. I do sincerely mean that. But I mostly want to target people who want to be thoughtful about media, be critical about games, be critical and analyze games and like mediums of expression. A very good example is when Scarlett Johansson took the lead role for Ghost in the Shell. And a lot of people were like, a lot of Asian Americans then, I would say many people like wrote very, very well and intelligently about how this is a problem, and a lot of people were just like, I think this is a red flag, particularly all from the Asian American community, and a lot of people were like, oh, let me ask some people like from Japan what they think, and they were just like totally debunked this whole thing. They're like, Japanese people are okay with it, that means it's not racist. And I think kind of understanding this context of what does it mean to understand like co-opting media from people of color, how that affects people at the intersection of those rather than from a homogenous society, and co-opting feels different. So that's one way to say, I want to be more critical of media in an intelligent and thoughtful way, learn to love the media that I consume and or create. That would be a pretty good example of that.
So looping back, just because we talk about, like Kirthik brought up that you have these conversations in the West, but Tim also brought up that there is this Western culture that dominates and just basically erases other cultures. And do you think that it's like, what is that form of culture that you think is dominating? Because, we've seen a lot of things, like there's all sorts of, there's that European fantasy, but then there's also like the co-option of like hip hop. But then there's also like how Black Panther basically spread across the world. It's like, what is the Western hegemony that you really have a problem with, that you think is erasing all of that? Because it's interesting, because when you come here and you say, oh, people are thoughtful about this, well, I feel it really depends on where you go. Like me, I don't identify as American. I'm from New York. Like I'm from New York. like I think Malcolm X said it best, where he was just like, I'm not American. Like, my people were brought here. Like, I don't have the same rights as other people. So yeah, what is the Western like culture that is like kind of like a virus just dominating everything?
So, upon greater thought on the matter, I did realize that Western hegemony as a term is a problematic misnomer, but it's sort of the usual academic term that's used. But what I'm referring to is sort of that colonialist absorption of all these lands and all these people, which includes not just a lot of Europe, not the whole of Europe, I guess, but also like Canada, United States of America, Australia, and New Zealand, where white people don't come from there, and those are very far away from the places where white people do come from, and they just wiped everybody out. They performed genocide on these people and continue to perform genocide and put these people in camps and prisons because we somehow allow them to, as a global society. And that's sort of what I'm referring to, is that this Western hegemony is allowed to murder us, imprison us, and exclude us. Effectively, white people are doing this to us, and I guess why I use the term is sort of because my country is one of those weird places where they almost wiped us out, but they weren't successful, and sort of inspired by America, actually put us into separate land, made us less than people, and now we have this weird situation where white people make up 8% of the population, but they own 70% of the land and far more percentage of the, far more percentage of the economy, probably still continue to control the entire economy. And so why this is important to me and why I mentioned that it's not about majority, it's about power, effectively. Because, for example, I scraped enough money together to go to GDC this year, and I think there were 40 South Africans there, and the people of color, out of those 48 South Africans, there were 4 of us. There was me, there was one of my partners, one of the people I'm working on with the game with, and then one of my other friends, and that was all of us. Everybody else was white. And that's just illustrates what happens sort of in game design, because there's a high wall to access it, because you need, for video games at least, you need a computer. But also I guess to some extent there's a whole bunch of secrecy involved in designing systems and such. But yeah, it's when your community and your demographic is associated with poverty, as in poverty has been enforced upon your community, not to say that we are all poor, obviously, but we get the situation where all these ideas in game design are hegemonic, and our ideas are erased, and this is across the entire media, obviously. So things like hip-hop, or the African diaspora, anything that's been made from them, like that is an excellent example of us fighting back. One of my favorite ideas is that simply by the fact that we continue to exist, we are performing activism, because despite the fact that they did literally try to kill us all, we are still here, and we are still alive, and we're still able to excel at what we are doing in our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of how, like, you never want to pigeonhole people, because I think it's always good to say, oh, we should include like little bits and be like, okay, let's make more brown protagonists or whatever. But the black guy doesn't have to like go through trauma in his game and tell you a story, because like, again, like if it gets stuck in a VR world where like it costs $10,000 to play it, or you can only play it in like a museum or whatever, then that's not super helpful, and it's just keeping people that that want to just express themselves, they should be able to express themselves in any way. And if they want to tell a story, like I think one of the interesting things about hip hop is a lot of it is biographical and a lot of it is absolutely not. And then people get stuck in this, oh, he said a thing. And they're like, yeah, but can you, but not everyone, even if they say, oh, I have a lot of money, that still might not be true. Lots of people front all the time. And that's just a way of thinking about it. You want to make things that, Never Alone, I think, was an interesting game because it was made with indigenous people. And I've heard there's a lot of issues around all that. But at the very fact that, it was, telling a new story, even though it was, a normal platformer that wasn't super interesting, but was, enjoyable. A normal platformer, you're like, oh, whatever. But this one was like, oh, I learned something playing this game. This was interesting. This all in and of itself was a bit of activism. I think I wanted to go down and kind of talk more about individual games that everybody's making with, I know we're going to run out of time, and I think I feel like we needed this preface. We needed people to talk about their experiences in order to, context is always super important. So Dee, you're working on a project.
I am.
And I wanted to know about it because it's funny, I try to Google people and I can find your game. And that's basically about it. I can't find direct projects for everybody, and I can find talks by you, but I can't find necessary games. So I want to know more about how your amazing brains are taking games and doing interesting things with them.
It's because I'm afraid of the internet. No, I will do full plug mode if that's cool. You can find my projects on garbage.zone. That's my personal website. And I have 2 projects right now. I am making a mobile game called Pal Pal that is about befriending vegetables in a very queer and peaceful way.
What?
Sounds
it's fine.
amazing.
Makes total sense to me. I don't know what's wrong with you guys.
Find a cool radish and you're like, could we get along? And you don't have to be friends. It's all consensual. And I think more relevant to this, I have a prototype of an interactive zine out called Standardized Testing the Game, a Narrative. You can find that at goingtocollege.club, and it is an interactive zine about the story of this person named Sampaguita del Rosario, and it's an experience. Just when you go into it, think about, oh, my parents moved so I can go to college and get a cool job and make so much money, and they won't love me anymore if I fail. That's pretty much what you have to go through. And what else do I have to say about that? Oh, the prototype is out. It's short, and I think you'll feel at least one small feeling. So. Please.
Yeah, I played it. I felt some feelings.
Oh, yay!
Well, since you spoke next, maybe you should go. I'm very curious because you talk about the experiences of working with devs. Do you find what are some projects that you've worked on that do any of your projects tackle any of these hardships that you've had in even indirect ways?
Yeah, so right out of college, I ended up being the first employee at this Silicon Valley startup, and I was naive and excited. And a lot of things happened. We were only 4 people. We ran out of money, and then it was a bad time to raise funding in 2012. So while we were maxing our credit cards, pivoting our product, and did a Kickstarter, and then I had to leave the country because my work authorization expired and immigrant stuff. We kind of settled. Our company's called BitGym. We built this toolkit back then for turning basically any mobile device into a Kinect, so we could track your exercise or movements using the front camera. It was pretty cool. I was super excited about the tech. But then we had to pivot because we needed to make money, and so we were okay, we just need to build something that people are willing to pay us for, and kind of that's our product that we have out in market now. It's called BitGym, BITGYM, and it's interactive virtual cardio tours, right? So it's a fitness experience. You can mount your mobile device or anything on a cardio machine in a gym or at home, and we take you through these first-person tours of beautiful places in the world. So you can travel through New Zealand, you can hike through the Alps, you can bike through Italy, and we use our tech that we were originally selling to kind of do that experience. So it's like this interactive experience. The speed of the video changes as you go along. So that's kind of the product that we've been shepherding along for the last half decade. And more relevant to our topic here, in 2016, I got a support ticket from somebody in, I believe, Germany, who said, can you create tours of all the beautiful places in Europe before the terrorists and immigrants destroy them all? And we've all heard things like this when we're walking down the street and stuff. Like, I'm sure most people in this room have heard something along those lines. But to have this kind of in our business support inbox was like a whole different thing. Like, these people probably didn't know anything about me when they sent that to our support channel. And this is our support channel dedicated for people being like, oh, the download button doesn't work or something, right? And so somebody took time out of their day to write us this note, probably thinking that we might never see it. And that kind of inspired me to take a camera and go back home to Oman and do a tour through the capital, past a mosque during prayer time, and through the markets where everyone's wearing hijabs and Muslim clothing, and being like, these are just people living their lives in their own beautiful city. Like, they have no reason to come and ruin your cities. They don't care. They come there for extenuating circumstances, the only reason why they end up there. And I'm not explicitly saying any of this in our app, but I just want to kind of subtly bring this out. These people might never visit Oman in their lifetimes, most of our users. And that's kind of one thing that I do. So that's BitGym, BITGYM. If you ever have trouble motivating yourself to work out, you should check out our app. On the side, I work on an indie 3D puzzle racing game called Color Balls. It's got nothing to do with activism, but it does have the word color.
All art
We can
is
stretch that.
political.
Yeah. And I also work on a tabletop game called Operation Dice Storm, where there's two asymmetric factions that bombard each other with dice.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's really interesting that a customer support thing led you to pivot to just kind of trying to show how great a thing looks. One thing, so we're basically out of time, so I'm gonna actually just steal 5 minutes. That's what happens when you're an organizer. You can do that. And I'm just, because I want our last two, I would just like to hear, objective, you've talked about that a lot. Can you talk a little bit more about just maybe a newer project, if you would like to, that's not here? Because you can play objective outside.
Well, I'll give you the short version. My life is consumed with Objective right now, so I'll give you a shorter version. I talked to you about it before. I will say this: Objective is for everyone, and the way that Fenty Beauty is for everyone. I'm just gonna say, I've seen a lot of people here with the exact same trophy wife kilowatt highlight on their cheeks as I do, so just gonna throw that out there. Objective is currently at the NYU Game Center Incubator, so we are working to launch the game. We're working to launch a Kickstarter at the end of the summer to actually produce the game. But right now, because this is what it's like to be super broke and super marginalized, I do have a GoFundMe up, so you can check that out on my Twitter, @PrettyDark with an E. My name's AM Dark. It's a really cute name. Anyway, yeah. But I do want to touch upon Objective, the new version right now is being updated, so I'm doing all new art, and it's also much more inclusive. The characters are designed to represent a spectrum of gender, race, culture, ethnicity, and it doesn't lose anything from the old game, which was mostly centered on Black women. We're in a time that I think we need to see more beautiful depictions of marginalized people, and not just depictions where, oh, let's throw some Black people in there, let's throw some non-binary people in there. No, every single character in this game is drawn by hand by me me, including the doppelgangers, hand-drawn, hand-painted, crafted with love and dignity and positive representations. So it's really designed so that you see yourself, you see your friends, you see the people that you want to go and talk to, and it's really done with love. So check it out.
And Tim, I'm just really fascinated because you have so many thoughts about this, and it's great. And I was just curious, is there a project that you're working on, or a project you have worked on where you have been able to explore these ideas?
Yeah, so I guess one of my problems is I always end up making games for other people. Engineer's curse, I guess. But I mean, thankfully, one of those games was the game I'm working on with Bahia, which is outside, which is After Hours, which touches on, I guess, politically we can talk about it as ableist politics, or able politics, yes, because it deals with mental health and things like that, and an important axis of activism and intersectionality that a lot of people actually ignore often, and we all need to get better at doing that. I've been good at remembering. As I was talking about navigating spaces earlier, people with disabilities and are differently abled have the most direct experience with struggling to navigate spaces. I'm also constantly designing things that are far too big to probably implement. Like, one of the main things I'm trying to implement is the experience of being an activist under apartheid, so burning down buildings without murdering anyone, and trying to also make an apartheid simulator where I make the player perform as the different architects of apartheid over time, so they can understand how this actually comes into play at a systemic level. But I guess ultimately, what I mostly end up doing is research. I'm studying my master's on interrogating problems and solutions on rendering black people in video games. It's sort of my sort of approach to video game design and game practices. But yeah, that's about it.
Well, that's all awesome, and thank you all for being on this panel. I mean, this is, the reality is, like, we could talk about this for like a podcast series forever. I think the key thing is that, well, I just ran an event.
Yes.
Like, I mean, like podcasts are like, you spend 10 hours and you throw away 9 of them, and you're like, okay, well, here's a 25-minute podcast, and it's like, and you got to do that multiple times? No.
Yeah.
Everybody here's making games. Yeah. We're all making games. Like, games take time too, and games with thoughtful things that go in there, you know.
I'm making analog games. I can do a podcast.
No, analog games don't cost anything. They don't take.
Nope, they're super easy to make and don't cost money at all.
Don't take 6 years to develop.
Objective will be print and play, though. It just won't only be print and play. So, you know, right.
Well, awesome. Thank you. And we are about to transition into our next talk.